What if the new Jedi Order was formed early?
I felt the Emperor.
You will not steal my victory. Not now. I've sacrificed too much for this.
Sacrifice? Is that what you call your genocide on Euphrates? You left this base nearly defenseless. These people need a Jedi, not a coward.
I could kill you both. Tell me, Jedi, are you afraid to die?
There is no death. There is only the Force.
What would happen if the survivors of Order 66 all rallied together? What if the old teachings were instantly changed? And what now? Having first met one another upon their very inception to the hallowed halls they called home, such a bond was stronger than blood, with many in the Order never knowing whom they descended from. And yet, at the same time, this very point was used as a sharpened dagger to highlight their deepest of flaws, the complete detachment from affection. I should note that the concept on if Jedi were even allowed to feel emotion or encouraged to control it is a matter of debate, with conflicting stories, novels, and plot points popping up across George's timeline. Pressing all of this aside and allowing my own personal interpretation to take hold, we cannot progress any further without acknowledging which Jedi would survive. And in reality, there are almost too many to properly count. Grandmaster Yoda, living in exile on Dagobah, Master Obi-Wan Kenobi, living in exile on Tatooine, Master Anya Kuro, during her second exile on Kopirigan 5, Master Ikarit, in exile on Yavin 4, and Master Kurik, whose only hiding location is never really revealed. Also, since Corran Horn isn't born until 18 BBY, and since the first Purge comic is implied to take place just a few weeks after the third episode, for this story, we're going to just assume that the father of Corran Horn, Hall Horn, stays in hiding on Corellia, while Jedi Masters Tira Say, Thalm, and Quinlan Voss would all go on to later survive upon Kashyyyk, with the latter having a son born roughly 8 months after Order 66. But these Jedi would only come to live here after Malia and Kinto Merrick, whom already imposed themselves into exile before Order 66 first began. Leaving no precise date for the birth of Galen Merrick himself, one could imply that he was born around the same time as Corto Voss. This would also predate Ferrus Olin's own capture by the Empire, the death of his lover, and even his confrontation with Grand Inquisitor Malorum, while the implication of the Camus Firestorm would suggest Jedi Knight Yinlik Ikal would already be in hiding on Alderaan. More than that, with the timeline of this story again beginning roughly 8 months after Order 66, that means the Jedi asteroid and its survivors are all still alive. This also assumes Jedi Masters Das Janir and Kai Hudora never abandoned their old lives, while Bagor Shadet would still fall to the dark side. All of this context, all of these changes, and all of these survivals allow us to fully and directly address the first major change in our timeline. A change that will appear small at first because we're going to have to jump back from the previously mentioned 8 months to right when the Order began. This story will essentially begin during one specific panel. This panel, and the sensations of the dark side that would creep inside the mind of Jedi Knight Shakun, the niece of Jedi Master Plo Koon, and to my knowledge, the only singular person that survived Darth Vader's march on the Jedi Temple. Of course, Shakti's own survival is and will always be a matter of debate. Those among you who have already watched my videos before should already know my stance on this. The novelization for Episode 3 makes it clear as day that Shaak-Ti was inside the Jedi Temple. Only later on, either because George himself doesn't read the novels, or he just doesn't care, did he bring her back during the Force Unleashed novel. And in regard to the Force Unleashed, too many people keep using the game as a reference instead of the novel. The novel takes priority. Skipping back to Shakun, I will acknowledge that while yes, she did only briefly survive the first purge while hiding in the Coruscant underground, but I must stress the fact that again, she is the only person to survive the raid, and that by itself is a massive deal. Any singular other person, security, youngling, or Jedi was slaughtered. No one escaped, and no one survived, except Jedi Knight Shakun. Being so skilled and powerful in this storyline, let's say that during the initial moments of Darth Vader's march, Shakun's tremor in the Force was magnified. Having felt the death of her uncle, just as she felt the death of her own Padawan, during the war that still scarred her. Fainting and passing out in her chair, just as she originally did before pillars of smoke entered the archive and disturbed her, this would be the site of our next change, where instead of witnessing the death of Jedi Master Jocasta Nu, she would directly witness the death of Shaak-Ti. Of course, all of this implies that instead of running away, Shaak-Ti herself would stand in defense of the younglings, like Jedi Master Ali Alan. Bearing the brunt of these deaths, not only visually but emotionally traumatized by the Force, shots from behind gave Shakun no time to mourn, igniting her lightsaber and skewering her attackers before the Force itself cried out in an echo. Since Master Qui-Gon Jinn would just casually speak to anyone he wanted to, as more and more time from his death would pass, let's say that here and now, even though he never met Shakun, Master Jinn would speak to her. I must stress that this by itself isn't a big deal. Since Qui-Gon knew and fought alongside her uncle, implications can be made that he would also know about Shakun. And he even hints to such a connection, not directly to Shaw, but the fatherly and son connection of the Het family in the life and legends of Obi-Wan Kenobi. With Qui-Gon Jinn spending seconds on words that formed the fate of the galaxy, he instructed Shakun to trust only the Force and her own feelings, to journey back down into the archives and to change the message already implanted by Darth Vader, installing the same cautionary words that Obi-Wan Kenobi did in George's timeline. The host of such a message was now Shakun, telling everyone directly that the Jedi Temple had fallen and that Anakin Skywalker had turned to the dark side. From here, she would flee into the Coruscant underworld just like originally, except now she would never contact the Emperor or even attempt to reveal herself. Instead, she found a ship and fled the planet. While I would like to say that Shaw's early involvement in the Jedi Beacon would save dozens of separate teachers and students, none of these can effectively be named, only implied, so the much more direct change would be Anakin's open involvement. With all of this occurring as Yoda and Obi-Wan narrowly survive their own betrayals, one Jedi that must be addressed is Jax Paven. And much like Anakin, who only became a Jedi Knight 6 months before Order 66, Jax only became a Knight 3 months before. And if we compare him to Shakun now, he also originally went on to hide in the Coruscant underworld just like she did. Holding this close to our train of thought, Jax will now, before Shaw departs, in our timeline, join up with her, and they'll leave Coruscant together, allowing us to address even more of the nearly 4 dozen Jedi survivors. Coleman Cash, even though he was a Jedi Council master, is, in my opinion, completely irrelevant, and he should have just been replaced by Tira Sey. Of course, neither her or Master Tholm wanted the council position, but that's not my point. And even if that was my point, the idea that Master Tira Sey and Tholm didn't want the council position is only an implication, since it's never directly stated that either of them were ever offered the position to begin with. But one must wonder, if Master Tira Sey trained Mace Windu, and she's lived for so much longer than he has, why is she not on the council? Especially when we fully discuss how, in my opinion, completely worthless Coleman Cash actually is. They could have just replaced him, no problem. To my knowledge, Coleman Cash doesn't even appear or speak in the novelization for Episode 3, and his appearance in the movie itself is very bleak. In reality, he never dies, he just completely disappears, and no one cared enough to notice. Because he is essentially only relevant in one episode, and because we as fans never see him do anything other than sitting down in a chair, we're just going to assume that he was killed off screen, simply because I don't want to talk about him. We're also going to assume that Depa Billaba never wakes up from her dark side-induced coma, and that, instead, she dies in her sleep, not from starving or even Darth Vader striking her down, but from the balance of the Force being destroyed, and with it, losing her ability to breathe. Disregarding the entirety of the Almas Academy, because I personally do not consider it to be a valid part of George's timeline, what would be valid is the inclusion of Jedi Knight Halagad Ventor, and Masters Ashok Boda and Bodu Boss. The death of Bodu in George's timeline is, in my opinion, single-handedly the most important Jedi death in galactic history, only comparable to Master Jin. If Master Bodu Boss never dies, if the Tedrian holocron is never passed down to Ashok Boda before being captured by the Empire, this means the Dark Lord, Darth Sidious, would never learn the ability of essence transfer, or at the very least, he would have to find a new way. In theory, we could say it was Set Hearth, but Set Hearth is really only relevant in one novel before disappearing, and the more important point is, if Ventor wasn't captured by Darth Vader, he never would have fled to Trienta or fallen to the dark side. Assuming that Master Kazdan Paratus would flee to Raxus Prime here, just as he originally did, his cowardly nature would prevent any desire he had to help, and Barden Jusk would already be comfortably living as a Mandalorian on Mandalore. With the death of Jedi Master Etan Tur proceeding exactly the same, one difference here will be the bond between her son, Vinku Skarata, and his adoptive uncle, Barden. Acknowledging the fact that he did resign himself from the Force originally, and that normally Vinku wouldn't meet his uncle until much later in his life, let's say that here, Barden could sense the potential in the boy when he was first brought to Mandalore. Progressing past this duo of student and teacher, as they would train without telling anyone, our next change would be the Altesian Jedi, a rogue order of basically just 4 relevant Force wielders who, instead of dying, would all still be alive at this early point. Dismissing Ash entirely, because she is only relevant in one book and only relevant in the Star Wars reboot, we would focus instead on Jedi Masters Djinn Altis and Arlagan Zay, both surviving alongside Knights Callista Ming and Geth. First off, the best thing about Callista Ming never dying, this prevents Luke Skywalker from ever sleeping with her forced ghost. While I do understand that the Skywalker line is basically just a bunch of horn dogs, I do have my own limits on what is believable. This rant allows us to finally begin the video by cycling back to the very same Jedi asteroid we previously mentioned and its initial discovery, holding onto the idea that Toma was still a spy. Let's say that Shakun's past message changes everything. First, with many masters, knights, and padawans fleeing from Republic space, and eventually deeper and further beyond, but changing fast when words became passed, shared, and safely communicated from afar, far from what they thought were Imperial ears. This means that everyone, every student, every knight, every master, every Jedi not on their own independent world would now arrive on the Jedi asteroid, enacting the very same plan that Ferrish Oland originally wanted to found and ferment an early rebellion. But since again Toma was and will always be a spy, this large gathering wasn't only allowed, but encouraged and pressed on, with Toma herself not realizing how unimportant she was until Darth Vader arrived and blew up the asteroid. However, the single greatest change so far in this timeline will be this very moment, not prevented, but entirely changed forever. A moment when, not even a full year after the Clone Wars, and with the reconquest of the Rim still ongoing, Bail Organa would openly rebel. Hearing word from his own Alderaanian spies of this impending attack, and arriving just in time to save the Jedi Order, their ensuing escape would shatter the stability that Emperor Palpatine had worked so hard to obtain. Not only because Bail himself would immediately take this Jedi Order to the only place any of them could find allies, the crippled pocket of Confederate space known as the Foundry, and the ancient Jedi planet that called this sector its home, but also the fact that Alderaan's open rebellion would ignite hope across the galaxy in face of the Sith Lord and his tyranny, leading to the very same discovery originally made by Luke Skywalker, but now it's made by Grand Master Yoda, awakening Master Ode Benar and encountering the Yasani people, descendants from Jedi pilgrims of old, knights and ancestors that came to the planet long, long ago. Here, instead of this meeting being laced with hostility and later on an Imperial ambush, in our timeline, with the Confederate remnants reeling after the massacre of their own leadership, and Bail freshly turned, Organa would essentially become the political leader of these Confederate pockets, pledging their support to the Jedi and winning the support of the Yasana people. The sheer size and scope of this story means I'm over 2,000 words in, and I've barely addressed all of our survivors, but I personally believe such a detailed outline is necessary to supply context for what happens next. This is an extremely long-winded way of saying that the reconquest of the Rim from George's timeline would be completely different here, and in fact, the Clone Wars wouldn't technically stop at all, progressing well past the original date, and with the factions completely swapping their allegiance, droids being programmed to fight alongside Jedi, while troopers were ordered to kill them, with Darth Vader still rising as more machine than man, with Luke, Leia, Corto Voss, and even Corran Horn being raised on Ossus by Jedi Guardians and Yasani natives. The galaxy itself will never be the same, especially for the hidden alien watchers that even now gawked and glared for any sign of weakness. Accepting the loss he blamed himself for, the resignation of Grandmaster Yoda came with his final suggestion, the end of the Jedi, but also the beginning, to raise the new generation under the idea that attraction and romance weren't forbidden, but encouraged. Families would be formed, loved marriages enacted, and past sensations of love frequently called upon for strength and stamina. Remembering well the Jedi that fell to bring them this peace, Jedi like Siritachi and Itan Tur, Master Thalm would go on to openly profess his love for Tirasai. Even Rowan Lands, the lover of Ferris Olin, would, in this timeline, having never died to Darth Vader and gone into hiding with Ferris before his own original death, be able to marry Ferris, just like the author, Judy Watson, always intended. Growing up as a Jedi youngling in this period, growing up next to his sister inside an order of beings that looked after and watched over him, this would be the life of Luke Skywalker, forever looking out across the stars and asking Obi-Wan Kenobi questions about his parents.